Microphone first. There we go. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the June 15th, 2022 Finance and Audit Committee meeting. I'd like to welcome everybody and first recognize that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo First Nation. Our clerk this morning is Miss Sky Snellgrove. Obviously, it's too early in the morning. Today's Finance and Audit Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018 number 7272. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted the authority to join this meeting electronically, and I note Councillors Bonner, Hemmons, and Brown are with us via Zoom. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Snellgrove.
There are no late items.
No late items. Thank you very much. So I'll look for a motion for the adoption of the agenda as circulated. Councillor Martman, thank you. Councillor Turley seconding. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. And the minutes as circulated, that was from our meeting of May 18th, 2022. A motion for acceptance of those. Councillor Turley, Councillor Martman seconding. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. So that brings us to the business of the meeting, everybody, under presentations. And first up we have the 2023-2027 Financial Plan Development, to be introduced by Ms. Mercer, Director of Finance. Please.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Now that we have completed the 2022 to 2026 financial plan, and that has been adopted, we're starting the 2023 to 2027 budget process. So I hope you enjoyed the 5 minutes of no budget presentations, because we're about to start again. At today's workshop, I will take you through an overview of the planning process and timeline, as well as a review of where we are starting this budget cycle at. So once I'm done the presentation, the committee can discuss what your expected outcomes from this budget cycle are. I should probably get the buzzer. Thank you. I always forget. So we'll start with the proposed timeline. So the budget process starts each year in February with the updating of the 10-year project plan. In June, staff comes to the Finance and Audit Committee for direction for the upcoming budget cycle, which we're doing today. And once we get direction from the committee, we start work on our operating budgets. Business cases and business plans are developed and updated and are due for completion by the end of July. So operating and project budgets are also due at this time as well. From August to October, all budgets are reviewed and presentation materials are finalized. And in November and December, staff present the 5-year plan and business plans to Council. So as this year is an election year, our goal is to have first 3 readings of the provisional financial plan bylaw passed by the end of December. And with this timeline, the adoption of the provisional budget is expected in early January 2023. So between January and April, the finance team updates the budget with new information and council directives. And then we come back in May and present the final budget to council and have adoption before May 15th. So that's a really quick overview of the timeline. So what is our starting point? So we start with year 2 of the current financial plan, and the projected starting point for the property tax increase is 5.5%. So that's 1% for an asset management and 4.5% for a general tax increase. And I'll go through the budget drivers of this increase in a later slide. So as you can see from the table, 1.9 million was used from reserve as a funding strategy for the COVID recovery to reduce taxes. So just to smooth the transition away from reserve funding drops to 1.1 million in 2023, 300 in 2024, and 100 in 2025. So unfortunately, this type of one-time funding puts upwards pressure on the tax increase in years 2023 to 2025. When reserve funding drops off, the shortfall is usually made up through taxation. Our projected user fee increases. So staff are working to bring the sewer and water user fee review to council in fall during the budget presentations. So this, the recommendations that come from this review will inform the percentage increases for 2023 and beyond for both sewer and water user fees. Sanitation currently is $228 for the year per household, and this provides break-even funding as we're required to do through legislation. So keep in mind that this is before the impact of the new MMBC subsidy increase. So this rate could change slightly, but we won't know the effect of that until all the operating budgets are completed. So here's, I'll talk a bit about the larger budget drivers. So $1,241,000 relates to asset management, and this is for the 1% of taxes to fund the infrastructure funding gap. $1,269,000 relates to the Downtown Public Safety Action Plan. So as you remember, back in May, Council approved the recommendations from the Downtown Nanaimo Safety Review, and this includes, among other things for 2023, the full costing of the 12 community safety officer positions and the 4 clean team members and their associated administrative costs. So these positions were added in 2022, but with a July 1st start, so full costing isn't realized until 2023. $2,078,000 relates to the Rcmp contract, and this amount includes 3 additional members added in the 2023 year with an April 1st start date. Now this was from the 15 officers approved in the 2021 to 2025 financial plan, where we added 3 officers per year for 5 years.
Ian.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Martman. I was looking carefully at those numbers, and I have a question of my own, but go ahead, please.
Thank you. Through you, I'm wondering, do you know if we've been able to fill the positions from the previous years?
Through the chair to Councillor Martman, they have not currently. There's several. They're still struggling to fill their officers, and this date we'll look at potentially moving this date out as well, depending on when Superintendent Fletcher expects to fill those positions.
Do you know, out of those 15 officers, how many we have hired?
That I can't comment on. I'm not sure, but I can follow up.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we should be budgeting for more when we can't fulfill previous years, but I'll leave it at that. And maybe we can find out how many we have hired.
Mr. Rudolph.
Through the chair to Councillor Martman, we're actually doing an analysis of Rcmp staffing situation and future projected requirements. We've just done something similar for the fire service. So I think it's a great question. I think Ms. Mercer has indicated that it's our understanding that the depot, of course, was closed for 2 years in Regina, so they were not able to create candidates. So there's a backlog. In fact, there's a shortage of applicants now with the Rcmp, given all the challenges that the force has received recently. So it's been and with the escalation of costs and housing and so forth, this is another indicator that we are apparently faced with more challenges in filling those spots. But I believe most of those were filled to date, but recently they've not been filling positions, and there are a number of vacancies as well. And within the Rcmp, there's been less of a movement in the past 2 years, COVID and the economy, and it's a variety of factors at play at that. But I think we could give you a more fulsome update on that in a separate presentation. That would be useful. So this is just a preliminary, but
Okay.
This is what we've budgeted for. Where we actually are is a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Rudolph, and thanks, Councillor Martman. Yeah, good observation, and I was wondering the same thing. It would be interesting to hear Superintendent Fletcher's comments on this subject when we speak with her. Ms. Mercer, please carry on.
And the one other thing I'll add to that is in speaking with Superintendent Fletcher, when we've authorized positions, that gets them in the queue, so they're assigned a number and they get into the queue. and as soon as officers come up, they're in the queue to get one. So they're in line with everyone else, but at least they're in line. Okay. So the RCMP contract increase also includes full costing of the 7 RCMP officers added in 2022. So these had a September 1st start date. So again, full costing isn't realized until 2023. And finally, an increase for general cost increases is in there as well. $128,000 relates to software licenses, and most of this increase relates to the Microsoft 365 software that came on board in 2022 through a phased implementation plan. $2,736,000 relates to the, back up. $2,736,000 relates to wages and benefits. And the contract increases as well as new positions account for most of this increase. So this amount includes increases relating to the IAFF contract that was settled, funding of the project engineer position that was added in 2021, but was funded from reserves for 21 and 2022. And as for 2023, that funding is now taxation as it's an ongoing operating cost. Full year costing for the 13 positions added in 2022. So these positions had various start times throughout the year. So full costing on these positions is realized in 2023. And finally, the cost for the 4 positions added for the 2023 year through the Police Services Support Staff Resourcing Plan. And these 4 positions had an April 1st start. And this was part of the 15 police support staff that were added over 5 years. We anticipate $200,000 more in interest income in 2023, and this revenue source will likely increase again as interest rates are on the rise. So we will be revisiting the estimate for interest income during our budget or our operating budget. $800,000 relates to the transfer from the Special Initiatives Reserve. So as I mentioned earlier, we are reducing the tax relief funding from reserves, and as such, the $800,000 shortfall needs to be made up through taxation. $107,000 relates to the transfer from the RCMP contract reserve. So this was funding for additional vehicles in the 2022-2023 RCMP contract that was funded from this reserve. And as this was one-time funding, the funding shortfall will be made up through taxation now. And finally, we have growth. So we've budgeted a conservative estimate of $1.2 million for growth, and this helps to offset cost increases. So we receive preliminary growth information in late fall of each year, and with final numbers coming in March. So we will look at that when we have better information. So that, all of those make up the 5.5% increase. Now I'll talk a bit about projects. So we'll start with funding. So the city funds operating and capital projects through a variety of sources. General revenue, which is taxation, statutory and operating reserves, borrowing, private contributions, and grants. And as always, staff are continually looking for grants to apply for project funding. So this graph shows the breakdown of the project funding sources in the 2022 to 2026 project plan. So we are currently underway with work on developing the draft 10-year project plan, and that will be presented to council in the fall. So 81% of our project funding comes from reserves. So that's both operating and statutory reserves. And this represents about $310 million in funding of our total $381 million in funding of the 5-year project plan. 10% comes from general revenue, which provides project funding from taxation. So in 2023, this is about $7.5 million. And each year in the budget after that there's a 2% increase to help keep pace with inflation. Now, inflation is much higher than 2% right now, but historical average is about 2%. 5% of our funding comes from grant and private contributions. So this includes our grant applications for the $3.3 million for the turf fields at Harewood Centennial Park. and $1.9 million through the Strengthening Communities grant. The Bevan Park Trail project is included in the plan, but is conditional on a successful grant application. But per the grant application, the city needs to show that it is supportive of this project, and by doing that, by putting it in the budget, we've demonstrated that. It also includes private contributions of $50,000 from the Nanaimo Ocean Paddle Club for the Brecon Docks, $500,000 from the School District 68 for the Harewood Turf Fields, and it also includes developer contributions to fund various community projects. And our last is 4% of our funding comes from debt, and this includes internal and external borrowing. And for a couple of examples are like $1.9 million for the Wellcock secondary access and $1.4 million for automated garbage trucks. And that leads us into where we are at with debt. So this slide shows the city's outstanding debt at December 31st, 2021. So the Vancouver Island Conference Centre has two borrowings. One pays out in 2026, the other in 2027. And the debt repayment is funded from general taxation. The water treatment plant also has two borrowings, and one pays out in 2033 and the other in 2034. And this debt repayment comes from water user fees. Sanitation has three borrowings. One pays out in 2022, one in 23, and the third in 2025. And this debt repayment is from sanitation user fees. Station number 4 debt is funded from general taxation and will pay out in 2027. And the fire station number 1 has multiple borrowings, and the repayment comes from the general asset management reserve. And all of our internal borrowing relates to sewer projects, and repayment comes from the sewer user fees on these ones.
Councillor Turley, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Ms. Mercer, given the increase in interest rates for borrowing recently, is that affecting the actual cost of the city, or are these set at specific percentage rates?
So through the chair to Councillor Turley, yes, it does. We have locked in terms, but when those come due, we're at the mercy of what the market is. So our most recent one is the Vancouver Island Conference Centre, right? Yeah. And we have an increase in payments for that debt. So
thank you.
It does have an impact. So this slide lists the new debt that is anticipated to be needed in the 5-year plan in the next 5 years. So the fire hall borrowing, or the fire station number 1 borrowing, concludes in 2022 for a total of $16.7 million in borrowing. The total budget for this project was $19.94 million, and the bulk of the remaining funding came from reserves. Short-term borrowing for new automated garbage trucks will be undertaken in 2022 and into 2023, with repayment of the debt funded from sanitation user fees.
Sorry to interrupt, Ms. Mercer. I see a question from Councillor Geselbrock.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up, I think what Councillor Turley was asking, I wasn't tracking as close as I could have been. Do we, like, in terms of the borrowing that we do for the capital projects, are they on like a 5-10 year term and are subject to interest rate changes?
So it is, generally we go out for 20-year borrowing,
Okay.
and usually the first 10 years are set, and then it's updated every 5 years after that.
Okay, and it's
So-
on a fixed rate.
What's that, pardon me?
It's on a fixed rate.
It is a fixed rate, yes. Yeah, so we know for the next, for example, for the Vancouver Island Conference Centre, we know for the next 5 years what our rates are going to be now, because it's locked in.
Great.
Yeah. So as Ms. Fulla points out, it is different for short-term borrowing, and that is on a fluctuating interest rate. But long-term is kind of like a mortgage where you lock it in for a certain amount of time. Short-term is not that way.
Great, thank you.
The Wellcock secondary access, so repayment will be funded from general taxation. Now, the bulk of the debt will come in 2027, which is the year outside of the current financial plan, and that is anticipated at $5.1 million. And the amount of this borrowing may be adjusted if other partners come to the table with funding for that particular project. So at this point, external sewer borrowing is anticipated for the DCC Millstone Trunk North and the DCC Departure Bay Trunk projects that are expected in 2023 to 2026. So the timing and funding strategy for DCC projects is currently being reviewed as part of the project plan update. And we have 3 anticipated internal borrowing needs over the next 5 years. And for internal borrowing, staff bring an internal borrowing resolution to council for approval, as that's best practice. So this graph illustrates the outstanding external debt, external long-term debt over the next 20 years. And it includes borrowing in years 6 through 10 of our project plan. And as I mentioned, the $5.1 million for the Wilcox secondary access comes in 2027. So you'll see a little uptake in 2027, and that's what that relates to that. The next large borrowing in the plan is currently for the water supply dam, anticipated to start in 2040. And we will anticipate a combination of borrowing and other sources for that project, such as DCC's Water Asset Management Reserve, etc. But as this project is so far out in the budget, we've assumed full borrowing for that project. But of course, we'll update that as we get closer to the project. But I would like to state that this does not include borrowing for the Nanaimo Operations Center, the Police Operations Building, South End Wellness Center, and the Waterfront Walkway, and I'll talk to those in a later slide. And this graph illustrates the annual debt servicing costs for the next 20 years. So it's the debt. As we pay out the debt, obviously we have less servicing costs. And under legislation, the city cannot borrow beyond its allowable limits. So at December 31st, 2021, the city's limit was $47.2 million for our annual principal and interest repayments. And that is currently 13.4% of our current limit.
Ms. Mercer, I see a question from Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Ms. Mercer. I'm curious, what's the highest limit we've ever reached on that debt that we're allowed to carry?
Ooh, that's a good question. I will, through the Chair to Councillor Hemmons, we would have to look at that, as I'm not 100% sure on that.
Not urgent. I'm just curious, as we have all of those other projects coming online, like the Operations Center, the Walkway. I'd be curious, what's our upper limit? Thank you.
I will follow up on that.
Thank you. And Mayor Krogh had a question.
Thank you very much. And just to confirm, when you say at December 31st, the city was at 13.4% of the current limit, just so we're clear to the public, that doesn't mean 25% is our limit, we're at 13. That's 13.4% of 100%, in other words.
Yes. So of that 47.2, we're currently using 13.4% of that. Yep.
Thank you.
Whoops, wrong way. So the next few slides talk to the project planning process. So the discussion will include pressures that we are currently experiencing and ways we attempt to mitigate the impact of those. So as Mr. Sims discussed at the April Finance and Audit Committee, the city has more projects than we are able to fund. And this diagram attempts to illustrate all of the pressures that staff face when compiling the draft project plan. So staff have many competing inputs to consider, and those are represented by the TAPs. So we have condition assessment issues, strategic opportunities, risks, better information, etc. And all of these things flow into the project plan, which is represented by the red bucket. So as such, we have more projects that we can do, and that's illustrated by the puddles on the outside of the bucket. So as all of that information and projects are funneled into the project plan, there's only a finite amount of resources, both internal and external, that we have available. And this can result in higher risks, missed opportunities, and ongoing condition issues until we can incorporate those projects into the project plan. So staff must take all of this into consideration and weigh each one as we draft the 10-year project plan. So there are many, as you can see, there are many moving parts when updating the project plan. So our emerging major capital projects. So the city has 4 major capital projects that are currently being designed and costed, and the main funding source of these projects will be borrowing. So we have the Nanaimo Operations Center, the Police Operations Center, the Waterfront Walkway, and the South End, it's now the Wellness Center. The current 2022 to 2026 project plan does not include these 4 major projects. So staff will be coming to council at a future meeting to present the status on each of these projects. And the projects will be added into the plan once electoral approval has been received. So our asset management update. So staff are currently working on updates to the asset management plan and the 20-year investment plan. And these plans are meant to be attention directing. So they advise us if the plans in place are sufficient or if we need to make changes to close that gap. The last update was presented to council in 2017, and the policy recommends that we do an update every 5 years. So we are currently reviewing assumptions and condition information and updating the models. And through the city's condition assessment work, this update will include more complete information relating to facility and park amenity inventories. So when the update is presented to council later this year, it will include recommendations on how to move forward in addressing our infrastructure funding gap. So our current economic climate. So based on the volatility the city is seeing in the market, the 5-year plan will be reviewed and timing of projects updated. So the existing plan will likely be updated to spread projects over 7 or so years based on funding availability. And the intent of this change is to be fiscally prudent in our funding and building of capital projects. So every year there are a variety of factors that staff need to consider when developing the draft project plan. Things such as new projects that need to be incorporated into or accelerated in the project plan. So an example of this is the Midtown Water Supply project that had to be accelerated into the plan due to the failures on Bowen Road. And as well, new information coming out of condition assessments could and likely will impact and change the plan. Staff have undertaken a condition assessment review of all major facilities, and as a result of the condition information, and as the results of the condition information is made available, new projects will be added to the plan as funding permits or with other projects being reprioritized to make room. So based on the criticalness of the work needed, these projects will be inserted into the project plan accordingly. Levels of service and community values can also change over time, and as a result, the 10-year plan is revised to adapt to this new direction as well. So the plan is always evolving and it's never static, and there's always a new input to consider when compiling it. So this slide speaks to our facilities, which I've mentioned a few times in previous slides. So the city has many facilities that provide various needs throughout the community, and the city must maintain these facilities and plan for annual maintenance as well as eventual replacements and upgrades. So over the years, the city has acquired many special interest facilities that are now at the stage of needing updating or renewal. And as we get better information on conditions, these projects will need to be included into the project plan. As society becomes more aware of the diverse community requirements, such as accessibility and inclusion, our facilities need to adapt and keep pace with those as well. So these new changes will also require inclusion into the project plan. As we create a more fulsome asset management plan, more facility projects will need to be included as well. All of these projects carry a significant cost and need to be prioritized with all of the other city projects for inclusion. So our next steps. So the world and the city has been thrown a bit off balance over the last 2 years with the pandemic, quite a lot of growth and wildly uncertain economic conditions. And this has created 3 types of capacity issues for the city. The first being funding. So we have a finite amount of funding available. We also have a finite amount of internal staff to manage and complete the project work that is required. And lastly, our contractors. So the current construction market is booming, and therefore the number of qualified contractors available to do the work is limited. So even if we had the money and the internal staff to manage it, in some cases there's no contractors available to do that work. So with significant cost increases, staff have prioritized critical projects, which will result in some projects being deferred to a future year to stay within current resources. So based on all of this, there will likely be significant changes between the current approved project plan and the draft project plan that will be brought to council in the fall. So in the fall, staff will present the project plan to council, and it will include the recommended projects for the 2023-2027 financial plan, a review of potential projects that were outside the available financial resources, and a secondary list of projects for council's consideration. So this is a list that will be comprised of projects that were not included in the draft plan due to financial constraints, but could be at council's discretion. And so this is where we ask for your input. So currently, the property tax increase target is 5.5% as indicated in year 2 of the current financial plan. And this assumes maintaining current staff levels. In developing the draft budget, staff looked to support alignment and integration of resources and activities to achieve the strategic goals and priorities set by council. So staff is looking to the committee for direction as we start our new budget cycle. So are there any specific priorities the committee would like staff to incorporate or consider when developing the draft budget or preparing business cases? So I'll turn that over to you for discussion if there's anything that you would like to see us consider in the upcoming budget cycle.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. I'll make a couple of comments quickly and then turn it over to other councillors. First of all, when we have these presentations, I always find myself hoping that a large number of the public are watching and listening or will hear this information through the various media outlets. I think this is such valuable information for the general public to have as they see we are embarking on our ongoing budget and financial discussions. Financial planning never stops for the city of Nanaimo, and we appreciate the efforts of our very competent and skilled staff. So going back to your very first couple of slides, the bottom line is showing on the slide there. Right now, very, very preliminary, we are anticipating a possible 5.5% tax increase for 2023.
That's right.
Again, stressing this is extremely early days, and it will be based from this point on council discussion and decisions on various projects and so on. But I would note that that figure is based on the following main drivers. As you've indicated, downtown public safety, Rcmp contract, wages and benefits, and asset management. And I'd venture to suggest that a lot of the public would understand that those are important priorities for the city. And in some cases, we have very little control over those, such as the Rcmp contract. I guess my other takeaway from your presentation, Ms. Mercer, and you can correct me or others can comment, is that given the present economic volatile times and the state of the availability of labor and contractors and our ability to tackle projects and our ability to fund all of the projects that we have in the queue, the coming year or years could be a time for, I'll put it this way, caution in taking on really ambitious new projects. I would suggest that we are going to have to be, excuse me, really fiscally responsible and very carefully as we move forward. And I think that was the intent of your message. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct. Yeah, staff are really taking a really long and hard look at the project plan to see what can be pushed out for how long and mitigate risks and whatnot, because their costing is wild out there right now, and it's not just the city, all aspects of the economy are seeing that. But what we're trying to do is mitigate that as much as possible by holding off on certain projects that aren't critical in nature Of course, we will do the critical ones. Anything critical that pops up, we will definitely pivot and do those. But we are trying to stretch it out as long as we can in hopes that the market will kind of stabilize and get back to a new normal, as we like to say. So.
And of course, it is always a balancing act, and I see a couple of speakers, and I'll go to them in just a second. Balancing act between supplying the services that our citizens wish to have and the cost of supplying those services. And that's always sometimes a hard decision to find a balancing point. So I appreciate the information. I will go to Councillor Geselbrocht and then Councillor Turley.
Thanks, Chair. Just in terms of specific priority areas of focus, I think a lot of what was written is captured already, and I don't know if it requires council direction on those, but I think, for me, I think the city plan implementation is an important one that we stay focused on and get those action plans completed and costed out and moving forward on. Thanks.
That is the priority for departments, and that will be reflected in the 2023 business plans that will be presented in the fall.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with just about everything you said. I put it in different words, and that is we have to be looking at particularly capital projects in the light of must-have versus nice-to-have. And there's one coming up later in the agenda that I think falls perfectly into that category, which I'll talk about later. And the other thing that we should be looking at, given the concern over tax increases, is what acts or projects that would improve the financial and social well-being of our city should rank above those that it would be nice to have extra lifeguards or whatever the situation is. However, we're not in a financial situation to do that, so we've got to cherry pick where we should be spending the limited amount of money that we have to deal with. And I know I won't be here next year, but that's my 2 bits worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Any other comments? Councillor Bonner, I see your hand. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is going back to our outstanding debt, and this is just me kind of thinking out of the box here in terms of how we can produce more income for the city. Are we allowed to pay off some of these debts ahead of time? And specifically, I would be looking at, say, fire station number 4, sanitation, possibly Vancouver Island Conference Center.
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, short-term debt can be paid off at any time. Longer term is more difficult. You have to keep in mind that we don't necessarily have the we wouldn't want to spend that much out of our general asset management reserve, as though that is a funding source for many projects. So we've factored in the account of debt repayment into that reserve, and then that keeps funding available for other projects that need to happen. So yes, on certain debt, we will, short term is easy to pay off, for sure.
Well, the reason I'm asking is we have a fair amount of money sitting in the bank in various reserves, and not necessarily asset management reserve. And it would require us changing the way we look at this. But I'm looking at, if we have a debt and we have enough money in the bank to pay the debt, if we pay the debt ahead of time, then the interest saved, we're basically borrowing our own money at that point. And the interest saved can then be utilized to pay for projects that maybe didn't have enough funding, specifically out of the asset management reserve. So I'm just wondering if this is something that's worth looking at, and having just come out of the pandemic, and I'm going to suggest that I think we have been fairly fiscally responsible with the money that as we have been spending over the last 4 years. And so I'm wondering if some of these debts could be paid off ahead of time, and then the interest saved then could be utilized for projects going forward. Is that physically or theoretically a way of looking at things?
So Ms. Fuller just reminded me that for the long-term debt, you can only pay that off when the term is up. So when we go to, if we're at 10 years of the borrowing and we're renewing the interest rate, we could pay it off at that time. So we could look at the time of when these debts come due for renewal. We could look at those at that time and then weigh out what's in our reserves and the bank at that point and see what our options are.
I just think it's a good exercise to look at, and it could be well within the millions of dollars that we could actually stop paying in interest, and then just pay ourselves back into the various reserves over the same period of time, and then saving the interest. So it's just something I thought we should be looking at, or possibly looking at in the future.
Thanks, Councillor Bonner. I'm looking, and I see Mr. Rudolph would like to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just a bit of more context as we're setting the stage, I think, for moving forward. Just some thoughts that we've been talking about at our senior leadership team. One is the recognition that we are a growing city. We are top 5 metropolitan areas in Canada. So with that comes growing demands from a larger population. So those calls to City Hall, the various issues that go with that, the expectations. So we have to anticipate growth of the organization to match with not only the population growth, but the infrastructure growth. So every year we take on 1, 2, 3 kilometers worth of roads, pipes, there's water main flushing, there's more roads to plow, there's more garbage to be collected. Right now our trucks are running over 600 stops a day per truck. You know, you just keep adding to it. So we have to anticipate, built into our organization, we have to anticipate some growth and growth pressures. The second thing is on the assets, and we talked a little bit about that this morning, and that's going to be something that is a focus of staff. With all the underground infrastructure and the roads and the buildings, there's a need to maintain a certain level of service, and just because it's under the ground doesn't mean it's important, and we learned that with the water main failure on Bowen 2 years ago, which caused quite a concern to the organization. It's an example of, if we don't stay ahead of it, we might find ourselves in behind it and unsustainably behind it. So there's a certain threshold there. The volatility of the market suggests that we have to go cautiously, and I think engineering in particular has been looking at ways to defer and delay, but it doesn't mean that they're not warranted projects. They're not nice to haves in a way. They ultimately will cost more if we don't do them. But now is not the time to take on a lot of things, and we can't even predict what costs. The response from the market has been unfortunately high for some projects, and it either means they're not going ahead or they have to be deferred. So that's a second theme. The third theme, and this one has caught my eye last year in the presentations, and it still is there, is our relative fiscal position compared to other like-sized municipalities. And the two that caught my eye were Saanich and Victoria. In the average folio comparison, apples to apples, we were several $100s per household less than those municipalities. Now, we could compare ourselves to other places, but on the island, in the island context, we're actually not in a fiscally sustainable position compared to those municipalities if we expect to deliver the same level of services that those municipalities provide. So we are in a bit of a catch-up mode for various reasons, and I think that 5% increase on a lower level of taxation compared to a 3% or 5% in Saanich, for example, at a higher level, it's not really an apples to apples. It's a taxation percent, but it's not really. So ideally, to meet the demands of 100,000+ population, we're going to find pressures come at us and presented to you as our understanding as a staff of where the pressures are for escalating costs, but they're actually putting us in a place where we need to be fiscally sustainable. So that's sort of the reality of it over the next many years. And then we do have these additional things that have come out of city plan and the expectations of amenities for the community that people are looking for, wellness, wellness of the citizens and that type of thing. And that's going to be some of the challenges in finding a path forward to build those into our long-term capital budget and the processes. So we'll be coming back to you with that whole conversation shortly. In fact, next week there'll be a quick presentation on the NOC facility, the Operations Center, in terms of a staged process. But all of those will be coming to you in a more sequential way, and that will be a future decision for a future council to implement those types of things. So just some general thoughts about where we sit, and we have inherited a fairly large footprint for moving forward into the future before we even get to some of those additional resources. So they're not nice to haves, and whatever business cases that staff recommend or put on the table for council will be ones that we feel we really need to have, and we're struggling in certain areas of the organization to keep up the volume of this, that, and the other thing. So just wanted to lay some of those comments out for you.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Rudolph. Really appreciate the comments and the information, and I think your words are very wise. Councillor Geselbrecht, your turn.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. You know, I think that the financial sustainability is going to be a huge issue, and it's something that possibly a bit more organizing around in the sense of how we communicate that to the public, because I think that we are in a position where, yeah, just the cost of things and just the way that our city has been built, it's expensive to maintain, and we haven't been budgeting throughout the years in terms of keeping up on that, and we're facing, going to face a continual deficit as we approach that. And, just hearing the comparison with other like-sized cities, there is a bit of a gap to jump, and that comes with, pretty substantial political pressure when it comes down to just percentage tax increase each year that's necessary to keep up. And it might be something that we want to think seriously of, like how we're going to communicate that if we are going to get to a spot where things are going to make sense and be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Minister, I'm not seeing any other councillors wishing to speak at this point. I guess I would just sum up, if I may, very quickly by saying this is extremely early days, but I think it's important for the public to know that the city, through the finance department, yourself and your staff, are planning ahead. We are planning financially, we're planning regarding projects, we're planning regarding funding sources and so on, and we are very aware of the current economic times and the stresses that are on our citizens at this time when inflation and cost of living is increased dramatically. So those are all considerations that council or future council will take into consideration as we make decisions moving forward, and we really appreciate this preliminary report on how the timeline will unfold and how the process will gradually develop in the coming months. So unless there are any last minute questions or comments, I will say thank you very much again, and we'll move on. And that will bring us to reports. And again, Ms. Mercer, you're still up. Consideration of a new permissive tax exemption. So if you would like to deal with that.
Thank you.
Hello, Chair.
Oh. Councillor Bonner, I think.
Was that Councillor Bonner? I didn't see a hand. Sorry, Councillor Bonner, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chair, I forgot to raise my hand. I need to step out for this one. I have a conflict of interest as I sit on the board of this organization.
Thank you very much. So we'll give you a minute to excuse yourself from our Zoom room.
I believe.
So Councillor Bonner is now in the waiting room, so we can proceed.
Thank you very much. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. So we have one organization requesting to be put on the permissive tax exemption bylaw for 2023, and the applicant has met the criteria outlined in the grant policy and guidelines. So it is Makerspace Nanaimo Association, has applied for the first time for the property they occupy at 2221A McGarrigle Road. So we are seeking the committee's recommendation on how to proceed with this application.
Thank you very much. So hearing from you that they have met the criteria for application, I would be looking for a mover of the recommendation to get it on the floor. Mayor Krogh, and is there a seconder? Councillor Martman, thank you very much. So the recommendation is on the floor to award a permissive tax exemption for the 2023 tax year to the Makerspace Nanaimo Association for the portion occupied by the association at 2221A McGarrigle Road. Is there any discussion on this? Councillor or Mayor Krogh first, as you made the motion. Councillor Martman? Yes, I see, actually, now that I look at the screen, 3 people on the queue. Thank you, Councillor Martman. I obviously need some more coffee this morning. Councillor Geselbrock, you're first.
I was just going to move the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I was going to move the motion, but Mayor Crow did, so that's awesome. And I just wanted to say, got to visit it a few years ago, and I really was impressed with this type of organization and this type of service, because it's very unique, and I'm definitely a support of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if this question could be answered or not, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I noted in their financial information that they sent to the city that the comparison between the 2021 fiscal year and their 2022 fiscal year, and there's some what I would consider alarming anomalies. For example, a rent expense went from almost 25,000 for the year 2021 down to nearly 12,000 in 2022. I don't know if that was through the generosity of the landlord or just what the situation was. And then I also note under the insurance, directors and officers insurance and general liability experienced a similar tumble, not the same dollar volume, but certainly the same percentage. And it when we're dealing with our municipal tax base, and 54,000 is 5,400, sorry, is maybe considered a small amount, but a lot of small amounts make up to a big amount. And when I see something like this, I'm thinking like, there's something not quite right there, and before I could agree to have this exemption, I would prefer to have some clarification on why those numbers are so, what appears to be out of whack. Thank you.
Ms. Mercer, I don't know if you're able to comment on Councillor Turley's concerns.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Turley. I'm just trying to see if this was, even though it says January to December 2022, I'm thinking that this is year to date for 2022. So it wouldn't be, whereas 2021 is a full 12 months of expenditures, the 2022 column is likely up to May or April. Yeah.
It would be nice to have had that.
Yep. Sorry, that was, it's not 100% clear in here. Because the rent, if you look at page 61 of your document, you will see the budget for 2022 is the rent and insurance are full costings. So that would be my interpretation of this.
Okay, thank you.
But you're right, it is not clearly laid out.
Thanks, Councillor Turley, for drawing attention to that. Councillor Martman.
I was just going to say the same thing. It was part of the year.
Thank you. Council, any other comment or questions? I just want to repeat, and because there was a slight change in wording in the recommendation. I think everybody has the correct wording in front of them, but it was what I read a minute ago, and that is that the tax exemption would be for the portion occupied by the association, 16.80% at 2221A McGarrigle Road. Right, Ms. Snellgrove?
That is correct.
Thank you. So if there's no other questions, Councillor Turley, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. This one is through to Ms. Mercer. So my question is, and unfortunately I don't know the answer, that's why I'm asking, but are there a lot of tax exemptions for nonprofits that meet the criteria in the city? So that this is not unusual?
No, this is through the chair to Councillor Turley. In October, when we bring the bylaw to you, there is many nonprofit associations on there that receive an exemption. This is not unusual.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're ready for the question then, council. So the recommendation has been moved and seconded. All in favor, please. And any opposed? I'm seeing none opposed, so that passes. Thank you. And we can get Councillor Bonner back into the meeting.
All right, Councillor Bonner is now back in the meeting.
Welcome back, Councillor Bonner. We're ready to move on to Report 6B, which is Nanaimo Search and Rescue Project. And Mr. Harding is here to speak on this one. Mr. Harding, good morning.
Thank you, Chair. Just an information report. The project was successfully completed in 2021, but we kept some funds aside in case of some deficiencies. Those deficiencies were completed, and we've reallocated some of those funds to some of the overages and a few other projects, which is outlined in the report. Can answer any questions. Also, Mr. Groot is also here to answer any questions council may have.
Thank you. So just for information regarding this cancellation, Councillor Martman.
Thank you. So when I first read to inform the council of cancellation, it's actually completion, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. But it is cancellation in the sense of the financial term because the project's now completed.
It frightened me at first, and
Yes.
then I went, this is good news.
Yeah, well, it made people want to read it real quickly. What did we cancel? So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions on this, that was for council information only, so appreciate that, Mr. Harding. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we can move to Report 6C, which is related to purchase of artwork seabed by Peter Achurch. And again, Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Worship. So time to time, under our successful temporary public art program, there's some piece of art that staff and the community would like to see us secure as a permanent piece of art, and this is the case here. This piece of art is actually, council will see it as they come in regularly in the foyer of this facility in the Vancouver Island Conference Center. And the staff are proposing, as well as going through the working art group, of securing this piece of art for a price of $11,000. And again, and I can answer any questions as well. Ms. Lynn Wark is on Zoom. If there's any questions, we may answer.
Thank you, Mr. Harding, and thank you, Councillor Martman, who is moving the recommendation to approve using funds to purchase this artwork. Is there a seconder? I see Councillor Hemmons seconding. Discussion. Councillor Martman?
I was actually, did I remove myself?
Let me remove Councillor Turley, and there you go, and we'll put Councillor Turley back in the queue as soon as you're finished.
It was very interesting reading about how this piece of art came to be, right? And all the elements and talking about the seabed and incorporating materials. We're about reuse and recycle, repurpose, and this piece of artwork not only is art, but it actually repurposes materials, etc. And then just to back it up, this isn't just a decision made by us, it's considered by city staff, and then it's reviewed by the Art and Public Spaces Working Group. So we have people in our community who are familiar with art who are making this recommendation, and I think we should add it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Turley. There we go.
Thank you, Chair. Question through to staff. I guess I don't often use that entry to this facility because I don't recall ever having seen it, but I guess the question I have is, how long has it been on display? Do we know?
I believe, I'll ask Mr. Wark to confirm, I believe it's been 3 years now under the temporary public art, or 2 years for sure, if not longer. Given the pandemic, we've left some of our temporary public art up a little bit longer. So it's been at least 2 years. Ms. Wark, do you know the exact time?
Yeah, through the chair, it has been 2 years.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing other questions or hands up. The recommendation has been moved and seconded. If we're ready for the question, I will call it. All in favor? And any opposed? Seeing none opposed, that passes. Thank you, Mr. Harding. And we come to the Hart Bridge project, and Mr. Sims, General Manager of Engineering and Public Works, is here to introduce this one. Mr. Sims, welcome.
Thanks, Chair. This is precisely the type of project that Council was contemplating earlier. You know, this was Council added this to the budget late last year at an amount of approximately $240,000, and really, due to the market conditions, we're finding this is significantly over our expected cost. It's an excellent project. It'll provide good mobility from the town site and hospital area to downtown. I think the question we would ask the committee to contemplate is it an excellent project at this particular cost? And so while the staff recommendation is to proceed and the funding is available, it is a significant increase, and we're seeing similar results with our tenders coming in, and there will be other, let me say, opportunities to fund other projects, or the need for contingency for other projects as well. So Mr. Rosen's here, Mr. Harding and Mr. Groot, we can speak to the project and the viability of it, or the acceptability of it. We have a really solid team that has submitted a design bid proposal. We've worked with both the designer and the constructor over many months and years over many projects in Nanaimo. We're confident in the ability to deliver a good project, but it's the cost is certainly the question.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. So I note that there, and as you noted, there is a recommendation that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that staff increase the budget by an amount of $188,000. I'm also hearing in your comments that there is an option to be more cautious and to defer this and perhaps use the money in other areas. So I leave it to council and take direction. Is there a motion that we can put forward? Mayor Krog. So the recommended motion to increase the budget, is there a seconder for that? I'll second. I saw Councillor Brown's hand go up first, so I will take Councillor Brown as a seconder. So that recommended motion is on the floor now. Under discussion, Mayor Krog, did you wish to speak?
Thank you very much, Chair. Pardon the mouthful of gauze here. Look, I think this is an important project for the reasons that are outlined in the staff report. It's popular, it enhances use of the park, et cetera, et cetera. So this is not the time to consider an alternative proposal in my view. So let's get on with it.
Thank you. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. This is the project I was referring to earlier. I consider this to be a nice to have, not a must. And I guess the couple of questions I have is it's estimated to be in fair condition. I don't know what fair refers to in the terms of number of years. Is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? We don't really know. Perhaps one of you might have an answer to that one. Thank you.
Mr. Rosen, please.
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. So we don't have an exact number of years of remaining life of the existing bridge, but what it consists of is the actual span is made from precast concrete girders that are quite old. They're probably half a century old. And on top of that, it's a timber sort of superstructure and a timber deck that was replaced, we think, more than 10 years ago. So the remaining lifespan on the bridge, I mean, we could conceivably in 5 years replace the timber structure, but there'll be a lot of pressure to actually enhance the crossing to provide that cycling connection through there. So, you know, when the time comes to replace that timber structure in a few years, we will definitely want to construct, you know, the 3.5 meter wide cycling suitable facility. So there isn't a lot of remaining service life in what's there, and we wouldn't want to just replace the deck when the time comes.
Okay, if I could continue just momentarily here. I still am having great difficulty supporting this because in reality it doesn't prohibit cyclists from crossing the river. Yes, they have to dismount, not unlike where they cross a railway crossing. They're told they're supposed to dismount Whether they do or not is another question. And dismounting really would add maybe 30 seconds to their trip to cross the short term. And for that, we're paying close to $500,000 to give them so they can save that 30 seconds. I don't think this is good value for our money at this time, given the financial pressures we're under. So I will not be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Councillor Brown, I'm going to go to you next, and then Councillor Markman.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you to staff, obviously the staff report recommended to proceed with the project, but I really got the sense from Mr. Sims that the recommendation is maybe to not proceed with the project. So I'm just looking for clarity on what is the actual staff recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I think that the report is clear in recommending we proceed. It's a good project. Staff's reticence is around whether council feels that the value is warranted, as Councillor Turley's pointed out. We are able to fund it from reserves, and it's an expensive project, and more expensive than we'd anticipated or hoped, of course. We're in a discouraging time as far as contracting is concerned, just because of the costs that we're seeing. But our recommendation stands, and we believe in the project, and it will enhance the mobility network. Further to Mr. Rosen's point, in answer to Councillor Turley's question, I think this will create a concrete deck, which will be a much more long-lasting structure, rather than revisiting from an asset management point of view. We'll be creating a much more permanent structure. So I'm sorry, that's a rather vague answer, Councillor Brown.
No, thanks, Mr. Sims. I appreciate your candor as you try to present both sides of the question here, and it comes down to a political decision. I have Councillor Markman and then Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. So the additional $188,000 would come from Community Works Reserve Fund, so we wouldn't be impacting taxes. Based on what Mr. Rosen said on the condition of the bridge, we may have to rebuild it in the near future anyways for pedestrian or cycling. I understand this is a substantial increase, but it's also part of our mobility access. And I think if we hold off on it, we may end up having to spend $1 million in the future when it needs to be replaced. So I'm thinking this is something we should do now.
Thank you. And Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to share my thoughts on this. I'm actually leaning towards Councillor Turley's arguments. When this first came up, I absolutely see the value of connecting the network and making that mobility, that network run smoother. But I do cycle this bridge, and you really do just have to get off. So what I'm weighing is that if this needs to be replaced, say 5, 6, 7 years down the road, the cost is obviously going to be more. So there's an argument for doing it now for economical reasons. But for me, it's not a piece of infrastructure that is an absolute need at this point. So I'm going to vote against staff recommendation on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hemmons. Appreciate your comment. And just for your information, your audio is a little bit shaky. We could hear you, but it wasn't the greatest quality. Councillor Turley, did you wish to speak again?
Yes, I just wanted to correct a comment that was made by, I believe it was Councillor Markman, that because it's coming from reserves, it doesn't impact taxes. And to correct that statement, it doesn't maybe impact taxes this year, but it certainly does down the road because that money has to be replaced. Am I correct, Ms. Mercer?
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. In a sense, you are correct, yes, because that limits, we would need funds, it prohibits us from funding something else. So that money is not available for another project, which could potentially need to come from taxation.
But if you spend the money from reserves,
yeah,
that money to replace has to come from,
yeah.
the only other source is taxation, right?
Yes. So the Community Works Fund is a government-funded program that we have the contract that expires in 2024, so we don't know if there is going to be further extension. Likely there is, but that, yes, so.
Potentially, yeah. Thank you.
So I have Councillor Bonner, Councillor Geselbrecht, and Mayor Krog to speak. Councillor Bonner, you're first.
Thank you, Chair. I believe at the FCM, Prime Minister Trudeau announced the continuation of that program for many years, including increasing it. So I think we're going to get it a little bit more. I look at this bridge, and I can appreciate the comments of Councillor Turley and Hammonds on this thing. To me, it's we've done all this work in Bowen Park, and the last little thing to do to connect this whole thing together is make the bridge wider so people can use it better. It is quite a narrow bridge. I find it difficult getting on and off and getting around all of the encumbrance there. I'm not as agile as Councillor Hammonds in getting on and off bikes, and I consider myself one of the younger people who are using a lot of e-bikes nowadays. So I can certainly appreciate that. To me, it's the last little link of creating this network. So I'm going to vote in favor of this, specifically since it's coming, the extra money is coming out of the that reserve that it's coming from. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a mobility link between the hospital, VIU, and downtown areas, and we've been talking a lot about establishing a good link between that. And we've put the work this far into getting the project to this state, and I think we just costs are a little bit wonky right now. We've budgeted for this, and it's a little bit more of an increase, but I think we should just get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm with Councillor Bonner on this one. He's made a number of the points that I wanted to make, including what is already stated, and it's in the report. The existing chain link fence panels are insufficient as guardrails for combined pedestrian and cyclist use, as they lack handrails and are not the required height for cyclists. This is the last piece of a lovely bit of work that we've done at one of the most popular parks in the community. I recall a person commenting to me that they'd been there for the first time and were just amazed we had this jewel. So for $188,000, I think it's worthwhile doing it right and getting it done. It's obviously nearing the end of its useful life in any event. If we're concerned about cost, and we should be, obviously we could arguably stop every project in the city right now for a year or two because the construction climate is what it is. But that's not, I don't think, responsible nor responsive to the public. And particularly as the Accessibility Committee has done such a wonderful job and has received such enthusiastic support, I think this is the appropriate thing to do. So I'm going to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Krog. And I will call the question after I very briefly weigh in. And yes, I think it would be fair for us to stop and examine every project as we move ahead, Your Worship. And I think we have to look at each project very carefully. With a new lens, given our economic times. I appreciate the conversation. I do see both sides of the question here. I did not personally support this project as a priority when it first came in front of council, and I haven't changed my view on this. I just don't think it is a strong priority for spending extra money at this time. So that's my position, and I will not support the recommendation that has been moved. But I suspect I'm in the minority, but it won't be for the first time. I see Councillor Brown's hand up, and then I will call the question. I see your face, but I don't hear your voice, Councillor Brown.
My apologies, I hit the wrong button. I'm not going to support this either. I do think it's a pretty solid project. But I went and took another look, and I'm familiar with it. By the way, the trail is awesome. It looks so great, so really well done. But I did take another look. I think it's functional for the time being, and I just note that I think it can suit its purpose for the near term, and we have a lot of unfunded big projects that I think are going to have a lot more return on investment for the city of itself, and for active transportation and transportation in general. I could list 10 right now. So they currently don't have identified funding sources, and I think they're highly important. So when it comes to this one with the increased costs, I think we'd be better served to look at how we allocate that for a different project elsewhere. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I am going to call the question on the motion that's on the floor, which is to approve the budget. All those in favor, please. I see Councillor Martman, Geselbrocht, Mayor Krog, and Councillor Bonner. I see your hand there. And those opposed, Councillor Hemmons, Councillor Brown, Councillor Turley, and Councillor Thorpe. So I count that as a 4-4 vote, which means the motion fails on a tie, keeping in mind that this is a recommendation that will go through to council from this committee. So I think we're done with that topic for today, at least. And I'm not aware of any other business, nor am I aware of anything on the question period sheet. Ms. Snellgrove, thank you. So we are ready for a motion for adjournment. And I look to Councillor Martman and Mayor Krog. Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Chair.